Yeah, the recording's active.
Right, thank you. Can I welcome all members and officers to the meeting of the Council, which is due to government advice to practice social distancing. This meeting will be held virtually. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed as soon as practical following the meeting. Everyone participating in the meeting will be accessing this meeting from remote locations. Please could everybody ensure that mobiles are switched off or to silent, please. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda. I will ask officers to present a summary of the key points. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch their cameras on at that point. But I would ask that, with the exception of myself as Mayor, at all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference and to ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. If any members and officers wish to raise a point or question, they should use the hands up icon on the screen, and I will come to you in the order I receive those requests. Please do not use your microphone until I invite you to do so. Very importantly, please lower your hand once you have finished speaking, because this can cause confusion on whose hand should be there and where you are on the list. So please remove it when you've finished speaking. Please also do not use the chat function. As on Teams, on this facility, we cannot clear any text on the meeting's recording. So please, I enforce that you do not use the chat function. In the event that the Council requires to vote on any item of business before it at the meeting, the monitoring officer will call out the name of each member present in turn and request them to vote verbally, either for, against, or abstain. I will then ask the monitoring officer to announce the result of the vote and the Council's decision on the item. Officers from Democratic Services and ICT will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and where necessary, mute those not being used. Before we formally commence, I will now ask the officer from Democratic Services to announce the names of the councillors in attendance at this meeting. I would also ask officers to introduce themselves as and when I invite them to speak during the course of the meeting. They too should ensure microphones and cameras are switched off when not in use. I would also ask that you bear with me. This is the first time Teams has been used at a full council meeting, and it's the first time I've chaired one with it. So I ask you for your indulgence if there's any little slip-ups. I can see that Councillor Amanda Williams has her hand up already. Is it important before Andrew introduces everybody?
Yes, thanks. It's just Councillor Cheryl Green can't get in. She's tried to, and it's locked her out, saying a firewall has blocked her connection.
Okay, thank you for that. Did you get that, Andrew?
Yes, I did, Mr. Mayor. We'll send her the link now.
Thank you very much. When you've done that, then Andrew, if you can go through the list of attendance, please.
Okay. Right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the benefit of the recording, my name is Andrew Rees, Democratic Services Manager, and the members who are in attendance today are all members of council, with the exception of Councillor Hussain is about to join us. I just sent him the link now. The members who are not in attendance.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay,
Andrew.
thank you.
Yeah.
The members who are not present today are, at the moment, are Councillor Sedgwick, Councillor Webster, Councillor Venables, Councillor Gary Thomas, Councillor Tilsley, Councillor Spanswick, Councillor Aspey, Councillor Dendy, and Councillor Baldwin.
Councillor Spanswick, yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Spanswick. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The only notice of apologies I've received from Councillor Venables. So, and I now have 3 hands up. Councillor, oh, Nora, did you want to come in? I was just about to call you in. Councillor Clark. No. Okay, Councillor Sean Aspey, your hand is up. You need to unmute, Sean.
Sorry, yes, I'm here at the meeting.
Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I didn't put my my mic on. I was just about to give Councillor Venables his apologies, but you'd already done it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, Councillor Aspey, can you cancel your hand, please? And Councillor Amanda Williams, did you want to come back in?
Yes, please. Councillor Dendy said she will be joining, but she's running a little bit late.
Thank you. And I now have Councillor Danisha Patel.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to let you know that the leader and Councillor Gary Thomas are at a funeral, but they do intend on joining towards the end of the meeting as soon as it's over.
Yes, thank you for that. Okay, Andrew, you're okay with the apologies and attendance?
Yes, I've got a few more apologies to add, Mr. Mayor, and they are from Councillor Sedgwick and Councillor Webster.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to item 2 then, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Councillor Philip White, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 7, Mr. Mayor, I have a family member in receipt of council tax reduction, and also item number 8. As a member of my state town council, I am obviously a colleague of Councillor Gavin Thomas, who was being recommended. Could the monitoring officer advise whether I should declare personal or prejudicial on that, please?
Thank you, Councillor White. You're only noting the appointment of Gavin Thomas. You're not confirming the appointment, so that's fine. It's just a personal interest.
Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, I now have Councillor David White, please.
Item number 7, I have a prejudicial interest. I have a close family member who's in receipt of the council reduction scheme, and therefore will be leaving the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Robert James. Malcolm. Yeah. Did you want to come in, Councillor James? Councillor James?
Yeah, I too have a member in receipt of the council tax reduction.
You were really waving at me, then your hand was going up and down rapidly. And then Councillor John Spanswick, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, same. I declare prejudicial interest in item 7, council tax reduction scheme, as a family member is in receipt. I'd just like to ask the question: how if we log out to not be part, how do you know when to come back in?
Good question, Andrew. How do we know when to come back in?
I will email those members, inviting them back in, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Tim Thomas, please.
Same here, Mr. Mayor. I too have a close family member in receipt of the council tax reduction scheme.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Spanswick, can you cancel your hand, please? And Councillor Thomas, thank you. Right. Okay. Item 3.
So Chair, just rose my hand.
Yeah, Councillor Paul Davies has just popped up.
It's same for me, Chair. I've got a family member in receipt of the reduction, and as Councillor White, I'm a member of my state town council, so I declare a personal interest in the noting of
Gavin Thomas for the Standards Committee.
Thank you for that, Councillor Davis. Okay, we will move on to item 3.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Councillor Richard Collins now.
Sorry. I would like to declare a personal interest in the Gavin Thomas Standards Committee item, please, because I am a member of Maestick Town Council also.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Before I move on, is there anyone else now? No? Okay. Item 3, approval of the minutes. To receive the approval of the minutes of a meeting of council held on the 16th of December 2020. Can I have a mover, please?
Moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second, Mr. Mayor.
All in favour?
Aye.
Silence is wonderful. Thank you. Okay, item 4, to receive announcements, and the first one is from me, and it's very brief. I do hope that everybody's keeping safe and well, and that you had a good Christmas and New Year. As we've all obviously been in lockdown for a few weeks, I don't have any mayoral engagements, unfortunately, to update you with. Other than I did make a short video, as did my predecessor, for the Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th, and that has been sent in and accepted. So that is all I have to say, believe it or not. So thank you for that, and we'll move on to the Cabinet members' announcements, and I'll ask the Deputy Leader, Councillor Howell Williams, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have an announcement and I get hold of it. Yeah. Members will be aware that a wide range of grant funding support has been made available to help local businesses since the pandemic began in March last year. I thought it might interest colleagues to know exactly what that figure currently stands at. In total, we have approved 4,931 grant applications and have awarded more than 37 million in financial support. As well as grants for firms, 1.8 million has been provided directly to residents under the Social Care Workforce Payment Scheme. 73,500 has been provided to self-isolating residents who've been unable to work, and more than 27,550 has been supplied using the statutory sick pay enhancement scheme for social care workers. I'd like to congratulate council staff who continue to work hard to assess applications as quickly as possible, and also remind businesses and residents of the importance of providing full details and to apply for the correct fund when seeking financial support. More information about the available support is featured on the council website. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Next, Cabinet Member Communities, Councillor Richard Young, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You may have seen it mentioned on social media, in the news, or even experienced it yourself, but the council recently faced a problem in which 7,000 streetlights decided to repeatedly switch themselves on and then switch themselves off again. This issue occurred all over the county borough, perhaps most notably on large estate areas such as Radcliffe, but strangely did not affect all of the county borough's 20,000 streetlights. As news spread, it transpired that the problem was being reported in areas throughout the UK, not just Bridgend. But our street lighting team got on the case. They quickly deduced that the problem was a software glitch and that it only concerned lights which relied on global positioning technology to circulate what time, or should I say to calculate what time the sun rose and set. The manufacturers of the street lights were able to quickly reset them and have provided assurances that this was a one-off problem which should not reoccur. Like me, I'm sure that members will be pleased that the issue was resolved quickly and that the cause was not down to aliens, as one headline suggested. However, if it had been aliens, it would have made for a very interesting council announcement. Turning to another matter.
They would have caught COVID.
Sorry?
Sorry, Councillor Young. I said they would have caught COVID. War of the
Well, you'd have
Worlds.
to isolate, I think, at least. Turning to another matter, after the last meeting, I was made aware that the monitoring officer had received a complaint with regard to the way I spoke to the Mayor during one of the debates in that meeting. So for that reason, I would like to put on record that I have a great respect for the office of Mayor, being a past Mayor myself, and I also have a great respect for the current Mayor. And as I said as much to the Mayor in a private conversation I had with him after the meeting. So, to conclude, if I have offended the Mayor in any way, then I would hope that he accepts my sincere apologies. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Young. Yes, you did phone me immediately afterwards, and I have accepted your apology, and that I consider that the end of the matter. Thank you. Moving on to Cabinet Member Social Services and Early Help, Councillor Nicole Burnett, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the last council meeting, I advised members that social care in Bridgend County Borough was facing some major challenges. As anticipated, it has certainly proven to be the case over the Christmas and New Year period, and it's still ongoing. However, while there are very, very real concerns about whether we would be able to meet our statutory duties, I'm relieved to tell you and to confirm that we have been able to do so. Local care homes and social care staff are still facing extreme pressures in dealing with COVID-19, and the council is working closely with Taff McGannog University Health Board to support their efforts in rolling out the vaccine and helping to prevent the spread of the virus. Unfortunately, we are continuing to see significant outbreaks affecting residents and staff at care homes across the county borough, both those that are council run and those that are independently operated. And as of last Sunday, 21 homes had staff or residents who had returned positive tests. A number of care homes have instigated business continuity plans to ensure they have sufficient workforce to care for and support residents. They are working alongside the council, Taff McGannog Health Board and Public Health Wales to ensure that services can continue and that staff and residents who are self-isolating can be supported. It is absolutely right and essential that care homes have been made the top priority for the vaccination programme, and we are doing all we can to support this. Domiciliary care providers have been more resilient in the face of coronavirus and are continuing to provide people with essential care and support in their own homes. And as this also renders them vulnerable, the next priority must be to get all frontline social care workers vaccinated as a matter of urgency. The ongoing efforts of our staff must not go unrecognised in all of this, and I'm sure that members will want to join me in offering them our thanks, gratitude and admiration in this ongoing situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next is Cabinet Member for Wellbeing and Future Generations, Councillor Denisha Patel, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Further to my announcement last month, the Shared Regulatory Service is continuing to play a crucial role in keeping people safe and helping to ensure that businesses follow all necessary rules and regulations during the pandemic. This includes making sure that tighter restrictions for shops and businesses, which were announced by Welsh Government last week, are being observed. Under the new rules, premises are required to carry out a new risk assessment covering issues such as hygiene, the use of PPE and face coverings, whether adequate ventilation and physical distancing are in place, how employers are maximising the number of staff who can work from home, and more. The team are also continuing their inspection work, and this has resulted in a series of enforcement notices. The team's most recent enforcement action has resulted in 17 businesses receiving notices. Of these, the majority have received notices because staff were not wearing face coverings and not maintaining social distancing. 5 businesses were issued with closure notices. For more information, please visit the Shared Regulatory Services website. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And now Cabinet Member Education and Regeneration, Councillor Charles Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following recent critical news and social media coverage of food parcel schemes in England, I thought members might appreciate some information on how the scheme works here in Bridgend and the high quality of the service that we provide. Every week, the council provides thousands of children with a food parcel featuring enough items to cover 5 days, not just 5 lunches, but 5 breakfasts as well. The food parcels take specific dietary requirements into account and use Welsh suppliers wherever possible. A typical food parcel features items such as jacket potatoes, peppers, apples, oranges, penne and macaroni pasta, pasta sauce, couscous, tomato and sweet chili sauces, ravioli, baked beans, soup, milk, jam, porridge, orange juice and desserts, such as rice pudding, jelly or custard. The parcels also feature life skill recipe cards, which encourage children and adults to use the parcels to prepare meals together and learn about nutrition. Having evaluated a range of options, we continue to believe that the direct delivery of food parcels containing nutritious breakfast and lunch items has been more effective and ultimately better for the children concerned. It has prevented families from making unnecessary journeys during the pandemic and has avoided potential problems, such as food vouchers being refused at stores. As well as building in an extra level of reassurance that children are receiving the food, the doorstep deliveries are supporting our safeguarding arrangements by enabling additional contact from school staff and our vulnerable groups team. As a final note, one positive aspect of the recent media coverage is that it has highlighted our own efforts to ensure that children do not go hungry, which has resulted in scores of positive comments and supportive feedback. I can also add that where there are rare occasions where complaints are made, I've been copied in, I have observed that the contractor will work very, very hard to put matters right and to make our residents happy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Moving on then to the Chief Executive announcements. Mark Shepherd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a couple of announcements, if I may. The first one is I wanted to provide members with a brief update about how council services are faring under the pressures of the ongoing pandemic. While the start of the rollout of the vaccine has offered some much needed relief, we are continuing to experience high incidence levels of the virus throughout the county borough, and this is of course affecting our own workers as well. It is clear that as an authority, we still have a tough few months ahead. Pressure on many of the services that we provide remains considerable, as outlined, for example, by Councillor Burnett earlier, and in response, we are continuing to prioritise the delivery of our more critical services. Where necessary, this includes the redeployment of staff, particularly into areas which have been affected by workers having to self-isolate while awaiting the results of a test or because they are ill with coronavirus. While I remain confident that we retain an internal resilience to these challenges, it is of course impossible to implement these actions without having some kind of detrimental impact on other services. So please bear with us if, for example, you find that some activities have temporarily paused, or if it takes a little longer than normal to receive an answer to a referral. I intend members to write to you more fully with regard to this matter this week. For example, just to illustrate what I'm talking about, I'm aware that we have received 1,000 more member referrals for this year, for 2020, and in the corresponding period in 2019, which I think illustrates the pressures on the service, but also probably illustrates the need to strike a balance between ensuring that members are properly informed, but also ensuring that we can still run our critical services at a time when we know many managers in particular are under enormous pressure in terms of responding to those things. At this stage, it remains unlikely that we'll be able to reopen our main council buildings anytime soon, especially while the official government advice is still to remain at home wherever possible. On the plus side, as an organisation, we have clearly demonstrated that we can support agile working and working from home, and these will be areas that we'll be looking at in closer detail to see how they might work to our advantage in the longer term. I will of course bring you further updates as we move through the remaining phases of the coronavirus pandemic. My second update, Mr. Mayor, is unfortunately I have to bring you some sad news. You'll be aware that South Wales Police are currently investigating a fatal traffic accident which occurred early this morning on the A4063 Sarn bypass. While the circumstances and cause are currently being established by South Wales Police, it appears that a vehicle was in a collision with a pedestrian. Tragically, there has been a fatality in connection to this incident, and while no names have been released publicly yet, we understand that the deceased is an employee of Bridgend County Borough Council. We are, of course, offering our full support as police colleagues investigate the matter, and I will bring you further details just as soon as they are known. In the meantime, our thoughts are, of course, with the family, friends and colleagues of the deceased. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Chief Exec. Can I just ask you one question on that? Was the unfortunate deceased working at the time of the incident, or was in their private capacity?
I believe they were not in work at that time, Mr. Mayor, but the details remain, the full details remain to emerge, I think.
Thank you, Chief Exec. Well, the next item is item 5, and I'm not sure if the leader is here yet, is he? I haven't. No. Andrew, have you seen if the leader has turned up?
No, Mr. Mayor, the leader isn't here as yet, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I think the leader did indicate that should he be detained, that could his item be deferred to later on the agenda for his announcements, please?
Yes, I was just going to suggest that. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, we'll do. Okay, then that takes us on to item 6, the report of the Interim Chief Officer Finance Performance and Change, the capital programme update. Once again, Jill, you're on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the purposes of the recording, it's Jill Lewis, Interim Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change. The purpose of the report before you today is to give you an update on the capital programme for Q3 2021. So this is to comply with the requirements of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy requirements and the Prudential Code. It's to provide you with an update of the capital programme for the period 1st of April to the 31st of December, and that's shown at Appendix A, to seek approval for a revised capital programme for 2021 to 29/30 at Appendix B, and to note the projected prudential and other indicators for 2021 at Appendix C. So the capital programme was last updated in October and brought in front of you at Council. And this report gives you the capital programme 2021 Q3 update, and also shows any new schemes and grant approvals since that time. So you'll see that the revised programme, revised capital programme is now around 34 million, 18 million of our own resources and 16 million of external resources. And Table 1 shows the change between Q2 and Q3, and Table 2 shows the funding assumptions. You'll see that there's quite a considerable change between Q2 and Q3. There are a number of schemes that have slipped, and a total of 14.5 million in slippage. I'll just run briefly through those schemes that have contributed to that slippage. But I just wanted to say to council that it isn't very surprising that we have got significant slippage. It's become a bit of a hackneyed term, but it is unprecedented times. If there's one thing that's very difficult when the country is in lockdown, it is probably developing schemes and construction, and so it is no real surprise that some of these schemes have slipped. I'm confident that many of them have just slipped through 2021 into 21-22, so I don't think there's anything to be overtly concerned about, but nevertheless it is a significant amount of slippage in the capital programme. So the main schemes that have slipped are the Children's Residential Accommodation Hub, that's 1.5 million. The road safety improvements at Heel Mostyn Junction, 500,000. Economic stimulus grant of nearly £1 million. That will obviously be incredibly important going forward for businesses and to stimulate the economy. The Coastal Risk Management Programme at Porthcawl of £750,000. My Steg Town Hall has unfortunately slipped by 3 million. That has been delayed due to COVID-19 and Unforeseen Works, but that's going to be used in 21-22. The Cairo Heat Network similarly of 2 million, and then the balance of slippage is nearly 6 million, but that's across a number of schemes and also includes some minor amendments to the financial profiles of the current schemes. So that's a very brief resume of the schemes that have contributed to the slippage. In terms of the capital programme going forward, there have been a number of new externally funded schemes approved and internally funded schemes, and those are shown in section 4.5. The main ones being Tremormore of 500,000, the Bearwin Centre and Ogmore Vale Washeries of nearly 200,000, and the COVID recovery for town centres, again, I know an area of priority for members of the council, and that's about 0.36 million. You wouldn't expect there to be many new schemes in between October when you received the last report and now. So those are details of the main ones. At 4.6, there's some detail on other schemes that have had some changes since the October report. So the Active Travel Pencoed Technology Park, the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal and Sustainable Transport COVID. So those are the main changes since the report you received in October. The revised capital programme is set out in Appendix B. The prudential and other indicators are shown at Appendix C, and that shows that the council's operating in line with our approved limits, something I always take pleasure in reporting back to council. You'll also see the monitoring of the non-treasury investments shown at 4.11. And that was all I wanted to say to council today, Mr. Mayor. I'll take you to the recommendations at 9.1, and myself and Deborah Exton are here along with my fellow colleagues of CMB if there are any detailed questions. Thank you.
You're on mute, Mr. Mayor. No, thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, I have 4 waiting to ask questions, but can I have a mover of the report first, please?
I'm happy to move the report, Mr. Mayor.
Second.
Yeah, I'll
Thank you.
second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have Councillor Nora Clark first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My questions are on page 23 regarding the slippages. And my first one is about the Maesteg Town Hall hub. I'm quite surprised that there's been a slippage of 34 weeks on that, which is nearly 8 months. I understood that construction work could continue during the COVID-19. And also, I'd like to ask about the additional unforeseen works again, because as we know, all members know that there were unforeseen works on the roof, and now we see that there's unforeseen works on the clock tower. So that's my question on that one. And then if I can just go on to the Cairo heat network, and I know there's an options appraisal to go forward with another scheme, and it was approved in cabinet yesterday. I just wanted to ask whether that appraisal will be within the costs of the slippage, or whether there is needed for additional monies there. And can I also ask when the European grant funding will come to an end, and will that heat network be completed within that time? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Jill, you're going to respond?
Well, I wonder if I could bring Janine in on those, if that's okay, Mr. Mayor.
Of course, Janine.
Yes, not a problem. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Jill. Yes, for the purposes of the recording, I'm Janine Nightingale and I'm the Corporate Director of Communities. With regard to Maesteg Town Hall, during the first outbreak of the first lockdown, I should say, of COVID, there were a number of adjustments that were made to the way that site operates. And a lot of that was related to welfare facilities because of health and safety rules. And what had to happen, I'm afraid, is the amount of construction workers who were allowed to work on that site was reduced as a result of the COVID regulations. And what that meant is that we did have an extended timetable for the construction works because of less people being on site. Now, that wasn't something that we could control, I'm afraid. It's part of the health and safety regulations. So that was the first bit. And then the second thing that happened was we had some unforeseen works with the clock tower and the clock itself. And during the feasibility work, we were not able to get into that clock tower at the very beginning in order to undertake some of those surveys. So what was found is that there was a bit more work to that clock tower required than we had imagined originally, and that added some time as well to the contract. But what I want to assure you is the contract is progressing really well now. And we are hoping by next spring to be finished. We are still working in that restricted way, in a capped number of people on the site, but the work is progressing really well. Now I'll address the two unforeseens and some of the cost. So when we talk about the clock tower itself, that was an unforeseen amount of work that we had to do to shore up the clock tower itself. There was some additional work that needed to be done, and also we decided while we were there that we should do some maintenance work on the clock itself, and put some new lighting in there while we'd had that scaffolding and we were in that area. Now, within the contract itself, there was quite a large contingency sum. So whilst it's over what we would have predicted for the build, it's still within the project sum. So we're not overspent on the contract, but we are using some of the contingency fund to fund that clock tower element. The second element that's just been reported recently is on top of the roof. There are three, I think they're called culprits, that sit on top of the roof. They're three kind of little domes. And whilst they were up re-roofing the town hall, we've realised that the culprits need some work because they're an important part of the structure. And that is another, again, piece of work that wasn't foreseen. They thought on visual inspection the condition was much better than it was. But we have heard from Welsh Government they're going to give us an additional £250,000. They agreed that on Monday to help us fund those culprits on the roof. I think the lesson to be learned here is that is a magnificent building. We've uncovered some of the history when you get into that building. In the basement particular, when I was young, I used to go into that market hall. I remember going in there to buy sweets and books with grandparents. Now the whole market hall is opened up. It's wonderful to see the structure in there. So whilst we're unveiling a lot of these beautiful features, there is no doubt that these old buildings have tremendous amount of work we need to do on them. And dare I say, I was really pleased that we had contingency in there. I think I would like to say that we've got over the worst now. We've done most of the difficult work in the town hall, stripping it out, and now it's a case of putting all the new features in, and that's where we are. So I think I'm more confident now that the most difficult part of the project has been complete. And what we will see in my stake now is that beautiful extension going up at the front, and we will start to see that town hall coming back to life. So that's the town hall piece. With regard to the Cairo scheme, it has been incredibly difficult because that was such an innovative project for us, in that we were really testing, could we do energy from mine water? But what became clear is that the geology in that area won't allow us, well, it will allow us to put the boreholes down, but it would cost 3 times the amount that was estimated at the outset of the project. When we had the professionals in at the outset, they hadn't understood the full geology, I think. It is probably the easiest explanation. But where we are now is we're in a position whereby we're looking at an options appraisal now. And if anything, we've spoken to WEFO, our funders, and they're quite content that we continue this options appraisal and look at this basket of schemes. And what we may end up with is testing a number of technologies, which, if anything, is probably a better scenario for us because we spread the basket of risk. So we may end up with testing mine water, testing ground source heat, air heat, pumps, as well as doing some energy efficiency work in a number of properties. Now, the funders are quite happy. We should be able to complete that work by 2023, which is the end of the funding deadline. And I'm content that we should be able to do that. So I think it's right and proper that we stop the large scheme for mine water. We've learned lots of lessons, and we can share that information with other local authorities around the UK, in particular up in the north, where the geology is different and there's lots of mines. The north of England, north of Wales, it may be more suitable technology for them. We'll share all those lessons learned, and we'll move forward now with a very different scheme. But again, the monies on that are fine at this moment. WEFO have agreed we can carry forward the money, and the only monies we've committed are monies for development at this point. So I hope that answers the question, Mayor.
Thank you, Janine. Yes, thank you. I now have Councillor Howell Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And well, I only just wanted to put my hand up to move the report, really. Councillor Clark sort of beat me to it. But
put your hand down now.
Just a general point. I mean, whilst it is obviously disappointing that we do have slippage, I mean, I think it's perfectly understandable in given the situation that we find ourselves in. So I'm not overly concerned by it. I mean, the projects are still there. They're still going to go ahead. They're still going to be completed. And I mean, I just hope that people are understanding of that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Next on the list is Councillor Matthew Voisey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question for Jill about the slippage again. How are our funders reacting to the fact that there is slippage? I know with the Waterton Roundabout scheme, there were very strict criteria: use it or lose it, and that resulted in the work having to proceed before Christmas. Are we getting flexibility on many of these other projects? Thank you.
Okay, I think Janine wants to come in on
Yes,
this one, but I have to say that the Welsh Government increasingly are giving us flexibility on many of the schemes. They're very understanding that it's very difficult to spend at the moment, and so I've seen increasing flexibility on some of the schemes that come through, and an ability to switch around within the capital programme. So if they do need to be spent, we are allowed to programme them against other schemes. So, Janine, did you want to add to that?
Yes, yeah, Janine, you want to come in? Yeah. Okay, Janine.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I think in the main, we've been quite fortunate in that there has been some flexibility because everybody's in the same boat, sensibly, across all LAs because of COVID restrictions. I think the one, unfortunately, that didn't give us flexibility was that travel grant, the active travel grant scheme you referred to, Councillor Voicey. And that was very clear from Welsh Government that they couldn't guarantee continuation of funding past the 31st of March of this year. So we did have to look at amending that scheme to get that complete. But they've asked that we now resubmit a bid for the second half of both of those schemes, for Pencode and for the Waterton roundabout. So that's going to go in. But then on the other hand, we are having flexibility. But one thing we're having an awful lot of is an awful lot of new grant schemes being brought forward and offers of funding being brought forward by our Welsh Government colleagues with very short deadlines to turn around these grant applications. We've had lots of schemes that have come in that they've asked us to return grant schemes by the end of January to get that money spent. So there's an awful lot of money coming to us that we have to decide well, genuinely, which ones we think we have the best chance of going for, because we don't really have enough resource to get to all the pots of money we've been offered. It's extraordinary at this point, I have to admit, the amount of money that is coming out of Welsh Government, because of course they want to look to be kickstarting the economy. Now, this is on top of the grants that have been given to business. I mean, one of the ones we had in recently was, can we look at electrification of our fleet? Would we like to apply for funding to I suppose do a feasibility study on electrification of fleet? So we are completing that funding application by, I think it's the 28th of January, and that goes in. Again, that money has to be spent by the 31st of March. So we'd like to install some electric points with it, and we'll commission a feasibility for how we could spend money in the future. So it's a bit of a mixed bag at the minute. Some flexibility with funds. That travel scheme had to stop, unfortunately, but lots more money being offered to us if we can complete grant applications in time. Mr. Mayor, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Councillor John Spanswick, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question relates to Appendix B on page 34, and it's roughly halfway down the page under the item Town and Community Council Fund. And I'm talking about future years, because it's showing their projection £50,000 each year for several years into the future. And as far as I'm aware, this is the fund where town and community councils can apply to for grant funding, especially and the criteria within the CAT process, which we place a lot of weight on, that the schemes need to be part of a CAT ideally to apply for this fund. So on the basis that the CATs are going to increase in the future, I think we need to be a bit more ambitious than £50,000 if we're really serious about town and community councils taking forward things in the future, and only putting 50,000 there for all town and community councils. That needs to be a lot more ambitious, and at the very least show an increase year on year if CAT process is going to increase year on year.
Thank you, Councillor. I think Deborah wants to come in on that. She's just put her hand up. Is that right?
Yes, thank you. If I may, Mr. Mayor. For the recording, it's Deborah Exton, the Interim Deputy Head of Finance. Just to answer Councillor Spanswick's question, That funding of the £50,000 every year was the original funding that we had for town and community councils for capital works within their areas, and that's been in the capital programme for quite a number of years, not specifically linked to CAT in the first instance. That was more for kind of improvements to buildings and infrastructures in their area, and there was a match funding requirement from town and community councils. If the councillor looks further up onto the page previously, about halfway down again, the second line under street scene, there's a line there that is Parks, Pavilions, Community Centres, CAT. That's actually the CAT budget that we have in place for funding and providing support for organisations taking on, taking over assets. And at the moment, we've still got a budget of just under £750,000 in there, so still quite a large amount of funding available.
Thank you, Deborah. Can I bring in Councillor Charles Smith now? And can I ask Councillor Voisey to switch his camera off, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to go back to Maesteg Town Hall, just in case anybody is still a little bit anxious about that, if I can just say that the leader, myself and Janine, visited the town hall before Christmas when it was possible to do so under lockdown restrictions. And we looked at the site, and I can confirm that the site is secure and safe, but also busy. Not as busy as it would be, obviously, without social distancing, etc. But work is progressing. And I'd also like to say that on top of that, we perceive that the contractors are incredibly dedicated to this project, very professional and flexible as well. One of the great things about this project is that the contractors now and then uncover some gem that has been disguised or hidden for a long time. They rediscover it and they find a way of building that into the finished project. They don't just discard it and waste it. And I know people can't go there now, so I feel very privileged to have been there, but the old market hall, now that the cast iron columns have been revealed, I believe that together with some of the hidden brickwork and some of the hidden tiling, which will now be revealed and kept visible to the public, I think that's going to be a feature of national importance. So together with the modern glass and steel at the front and the conserved historic features inside, I think we've got a real treasure in the making there in Maesteg Town Hall. And the contractors also regard this as a personal project of theirs. They've really taken it to heart and they want it to be great.
Thank you, Councillor. I will give way on the list to Councillor Ross Thomas, please.
Yeah, many thanks, Chair. Diolch. I'd just like to echo the sentiments of Councillor Nora Clark in terms of the Cairo mine water scheme. It's very disappointing, really, to see where we are with that. And while I appreciate the options appraisal was discussed, and I welcome that at yesterday's cabinet meeting, I refer you to the comments of the cabinet member at the time when the bid was successful. We know the technology exists, we know it's been proven, we know the system works, and that's why I'm so excited it's been brought into Progen. So what's quite clear is that for Cairo at least, the technology doesn't exist, and for Cairo again, the system doesn't work. My concern in all of this is how we move forward in terms of the environmental projects that we put our name to and invest in. And clearly from the cabinet report yesterday, there's a significant amount of investment that's gone into this, not just financially, but in terms of officer time and resource as well. And of course, moving forward, this council has declared a climate emergency, and it's right and proper that we invest and look to invest in environmental ways and means of tackling climate change through these such projects, but it's clear a lot of risk has been taken here and it hasn't necessarily paid off. And I think it's very clear that we now need to be upfront, perhaps an internal inquiry into means and ways that we do put our name forward on these projects, in order that the risk, the large-scale risk, is upfront and we know exactly what we're getting into. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Janine, do you want to come in on that, please?
Yes, please, if I may, Mr. Mayor. I think the point we need to understand about this Cairo mine water heat project was that it was a demonstrator project. It was always meant to be just to see whether the technology was feasible in this area. That was a very important part of the project, and some of the initial funding up front was to do all of that risk assessment, to do those boreholes, and to see whether this project was feasible. Now, from that, what we've discovered is the geology underneath Cairo in the mines is very, very hard rock, for want of a better way of describing it, really. And what that would mean is it would be incredibly expensive to borehole the depth that would be needed for this district network from the mine water. That's not to say mine water heat doesn't work. We know it does work, but what the situation we had, unfortunately, was the demonstrator of this magnitude was not suitable for the geology of Cairo. But that's not to say we're going to give up, because we have committed yesterday at Cabinet to our 2030 decarbonisation strategy, and a very important part of that is about energy and looking at sustainable forms of energy. So what we want to do instead is look at, can we use the mine water heat for different projects, and that's part of the options appraisal now. For instance, what we want to look at is, could we use a smaller borehole and use mine water heat to heat the primary school in the area, and we could have a smaller scale demonstrator of that technology at that school. And the other thing, of course, is whilst we wanted to heat that Tudor estate with V2C on the mine water, that was part of what we wanted to achieve for fuel poverty. It was about decarbonisation and fuel poverty, importantly. What we now think we can do, instead of mine water heat, is use ground source heat for that Tudor estate, and that's what we want to investigate, whether that's possible as an option. Again, a very innovative technology. It would tackle fuel poverty, and it would be great for our 2030 strategy. And then also look at what else we can do in that area. So whilst we are disappointed, it was only meant to be a demonstrator. It was meant to be, could we do the feasibility? But I think what has become very clear is we've learned so many lessons and got a lot of experience now from the work we've done that we can share. And the funder is pleased about that, and they're asking us to put a report together to show the learning that we've had. But also they're quite pleased that we're looking at a basket of schemes going forward, and that's why we're allowed to retain the money. We're going to be a demonstrator for a number of technologies, not just the mine water. So I think in that respect, hopefully we will still be able to contribute to fuel poverty and definitely contribute to decarbonisation in the community of Cairo. It will just take us a little bit longer to get the feasibility, and then we'll be able to come and share with you exactly what we're proposing. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. I've got one more speaker or questioner, which is Councillor Richard Young, and then I have a question to conclude this part. Thank you, Councillor Richard Young, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I don't subscribe to the pessimism that Councillor Pennell Thomas actually talks about. I'm fairly confident in my own mind that there will be an element of mine water within the final project going forward, and that's why I'm still excited, because we can demonstrate that mine water technology works. It is a demonstrator at the end of the day, as Janine has said, which means that we were there to learn lessons, and what we learned is that geologically it may not be possible to extend the scheme to where we wanted it to be, but it doesn't mean to say that mine water will not be involved in the final scheme. And I think our funders are very pleased with the lessons that we've learned. But what they're really pleased about is the fact that we're not giving up on mine water, and the fact that we are bringing other schemes to run alongside it. And I think that they see the value in that. I think if you go back to your GCE days, if you were a teacher, you'd be setting questions to compare and contrast, and that's what we're going to do in Cairo, in actual fact, is to run different technologies side by side, see which one is technologically most suitable for our needs, to be perfectly honest with you. And Councillor Penel-Thomas will recall that yesterday in the Cabinet papers there was an outline of the appraisal that is going to be undertaken, and 2 of those sections actually did contain the fact that we would retain an element of mine water. So let's not count our chickens, and let's not be sorry that there won't be mine water project in Cairo. Let's look forward to the fact that we actually will have a project in Cairo which will have an element of mine water.
Thank you, Councillor. I have now had someone indicate, but this will be the last question on this, please. Councillor David Edwards.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just amazed, actually, that the geology of the area is untried and untested. There were 3 colliery shafts sunk within a few hundred yards of this borehole. Surely there are mining records which would indicate the strata as these shafts were sunk. So to say that it's a geological issue, all I can say is it's a geological issue that there must be records for, and obviously weren't sourced at the time, and we once again haven't done our homework. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Keith. I know I called you David, but you're listed as David on the list here. Janine, please come in.
Hello, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Edwards, you made some very good points there, but I just want to assure you that we worked with the Coal Authority on this project. They were instrumental in supplying us with information. I think what we mean to say is, yes, we know obviously it was a mine water heat project, and yes, this area has been heavily mined. I mean, I grew up in my state myself, so my grandfather was in the mine industry, so I used to visit some of these colliery sites quite often, actually. I think where we got to was that the boreholes would cost 3 times the amount that was estimated in the project. So I think the geology has led to financial acceleration in the project, and it almost became too expensive, but it was geology led. Now, that's not to say that we didn't know there would be tough geology, and that's not to say the Coal Board weren't involved, because of course they were an instrumental part of this. But what became clear is that some of the estimates that were coming through were way higher than had been expected, and way higher than the Coal Board had expected. And what we did was, we weren't content with the initial estimates. We went back out to the market and got 3 more. And they were all coming back saying the same thing, that it was about 3 times as expensive as we'd expected. It was into the millions to sink these boreholes. So the geology was a contributing factor, I'm afraid, even though we understood it was difficult terrain and we understood where the mine water was. I mean, that's not to say that we couldn't do this scheme in the future, because as technology moves on, these things become cheaper to do. But it's just right now, it's a bit prohibitive to go ahead with the major scheme. But what we would like to do is a smaller scheme with a smaller borehole with less cost as a demonstrator, and then look to the future whether we can at one stage or other use that technology in the borough again. But just to assure you, you know, we did have the Coal Board involved, and all of the information was available to us.
Thank you, Janine. Before we move on from this and take the vote on it, I have a question, I suppose, to Jill, really. Capital Strategy Monitoring, paragraph 4.11. I'm very conscious of the fact that in London, office space is being emptied rapidly and turned into flats because of what's happened with remote working, at home working and so on. So I note from 411 that we have quite a large portfolio of office space. I wondered if you could tell the council what the vacancy rate is of that office space, and are there any plans to convert or use this for other uses? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And others may want to come in on this one, Janine and Mark, I suspect, but we've certainly taken the opportunity to learn some lessons from COVID. And we will be looking at the way we work yet again in terms of office accommodation and indeed many of the HR policies in terms of whether we need all the buildings that we have. You might recall it was before my time with the council, but that was the plan before, and Ravenscourt was going to be released. And that didn't come to fruition because we closed other buildings and needed that space. But I'm sure that Janine might be able to expand a little bit on corporate landlord and some of the work that they're doing in terms of looking at all our buildings.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Janine, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, a really interesting question, and actually very timely, because I've just been asked would I chair that accommodation group for corporate landlord, and I think there's a meeting of that next week. Right. It is a real challenge, because I think a year ago we never would have thought that we would be working remotely like this, and effectively as well. Look how well our meetings run and how well the council has progressed. That's not to say we don't envisage a return back to some office spaces, because I think you can't, there's a number of things that don't work as well, of course, one of them being staff welfare and making sure that staff feel part of the team and we are looking after their well-being. That's something that's always a lot more difficult remotely. But I think where we are is we think we'll probably be in a blended position. So one of the things that we need to do with that accommodation group in particular is to look at what the needs are across the organisation, what are our requirements, to look at staff categorisation and to look at how often we would want to be in the office and what the benefits would be for us for coming together as well as working more remotely. And that will be the mandate we have across all of our estate, to look at whether we can do some office rationalisation, for want of a better word, really. And just to reassure members, in my previous employment when I was in Cardiff, I run a land and building programme for the council there, and that's what we did. We did a lot of office rationalisation, and we managed to dispose of 8 different operational bases and bring people together. An enormous piece of work, but it can be successfully done, and I think we've got the right environment for that now. So that's the office piece. And then the second piece is about office accommodation across Bridgend and vacancy rates. I can't tell you what the vacancy rate is off the top of my head, I'm afraid, but I would be able to get that for you and to get that back to you. But what I will say is what we have found is the nature of accommodation for offices is changing. What we're finding is there's an awful lot of demand now for kind of like an enterprise hub sort of accommodation, whereby new business startups can come and rent 1 or 2 rooms and come together with lots of other businesses, startup businesses. And I know this has been done very successfully in Caerphilly. There's a large office up there in Caerphilly, a large building that's filled with firms of accountants and technology people and recruiters and all jewellery makers, etc. All in small rooms, offices that share communal space, share printing, share admin functions, and what that does is create almost a community of new businesses. And as they grow and get bigger, they can move out to bigger premises, and it's almost like an incubation unit, really. And that's what we've been told we need for Bridgend. So what we want to look at in our hub programme is whether we can create those incubation spaces to start to stimulate our business economy again and start to get us back into a recovery position. So that's where our focus is, Mr. Mayor, is on that approach. As well, of course, we'd like to fill our offices, but we'd like to see if we could fill it more bespoke, in a more bespoke way going forward. But I will get those figures for you.
Thank you, Janine. I'd now call Councillor Pam Davis forward, but before I do, can I just remind members, please, not to use the chat box to send messages. Please, as reminded at the beginning of the session, please don't use them. Councillor Pam Davis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The business of turning offices into one-bedroom flats or pods like they've got in Japan, I brought up when I was on planning, I think about 2015-16. We had a lot of offices that were empty. The one I was thinking of was the old John Raymond Yard, the office space there, which has now become a call centre. That was empty for more than 2 years. And I suggested, because of the dreaded bedroom tax, people were then downsizing from 4, 3 to 2 and 1 bedroom, which compounded the problem of the more bedrooms down to people were trying to get 2 and 1 bedroom places. So it compounded it the other way. And I suggested then, like Japan, they have these pods that roughly about £10 a week. And they have a room, a bedroom, a desk, etc. But they share a kitchen and they share lounges, etc. And I thought, rather than have the premises empty, it would be a good idea. Plus the fact you've got women and men in their 50s and 60s that can't get points because their children are grown up and gone, they're divorced, they can't have a mortgage. It would also help them out to actually get, because it's very, very difficult for people at the tail end of, should I say, and not youngsters, to get on the ladder again, because they can't just have the points to have a house or a flat. And that would be ideal, to have a 1-bedroom place like that where they could go. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Davis. I think I can remember you putting that forward, actually. So thank you, everybody, on that. The report has been proposed and seconded. All in favour?
Right.
Yep. Yes, thank you. Silence is golden. Okay, we will move on then to item number 7. But is the leader returned yet? Have we seen that? I know Councillor Gary Thomas has.
Yes, the leader is present, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, before we go on to item 7 then, leader, would you like to present your report now, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. If that is convenient to you, and apologies for being late attending the meeting, but I have been at the same funeral that Councillor Thomas was at, and I did pass on the condolences of all members and officers who know Edith Hughes and Gareth Hughes, of course, a former colleague of ours. So I'll now give my announcements. I recently received some new information from Cwmtaf Morgannwg University Health Board concerning the rollout of the coronavirus vaccination programme, which I would like to share with members. And I know there is an emergency question later, which of course I will also answer. According to the latest figures supplied by the Health Board, as of Sunday, the 17th of January, a total of 21,857 people had been vaccinated across the Cwm Taf region. For Bridgend County Borough, this breaks down as 3,693 people, with 1,461 vaccinations administered through GP surgeries, 1,715 through vaccination centres, and 517 through local care homes. While not included in local authority area figures, hospital vaccination centres across the region have accounted for a further 11,377 people. The Council is continuing to work closely with the Health Board and is supporting the rollout of the vaccine in Bridgend County Borough. Myself and the Chief Executive meet with the Chair, Chief Executive, Director of Public Health and the leaders and Chief Executives of RCT and Merthyr councils on a weekly basis, and this is at the top of our agenda. The Health Board has provided further information indicating that they intend to vaccinate a further 22,834 residents across the region this week, 6,913 of which are Bridgend County Borough residents. This will include 593 vaccinations in a total of 7 care homes, with 3,980 doses delivered by GP practices across the County Borough, and 2,340 doses provided within the vaccination centre, that's at Ravenscourt. As you know, vaccinations are targeting the most vulnerable and exposed members of the community in a series of priority groupings which have been determined on a UK-wide basis by the Joint Committee for Vaccination and Immunisation. As an immediate priority, the highest priority, the initial rollout is restricted to staff and residents at care homes, frontline health and social care staff, and people in local communities who are aged over 80. All local GP surgeries have signed up to take part in the vaccination programme, and people are being contacted directly when it is their turn to receive the vaccination. As councillors and elected representatives, I know that we are explaining that to residents, and we're all encouraging them not to tie up resources by inquiring about it at pharmacies and GP surgeries. The system has been designed to prevent queue jumping, so nobody should attempt to attend a vaccination centre without having an appointment in place to do so. When it is our turn, we will be contacted with details of where and when to go. Sadly, residents also need to be alert for scammers who have been taking advantage of the situation to try and trick people, especially the elderly, into handing over confidential information or even to pay for a fake inoculation. These criminals are knocking on doors and are sending a professional-looking texts and emails. So please remind your constituents that the NHS will never, ever ask for a payment, as the vaccine is free to receive. They will also not turn up at anyone's home unannounced, and will not ask for your bank details or for you to prove your identity by sending copies of personal documents such as a passport. As the effect of the vaccine may not be seen nationally for many months, the advice on keeping Wales safe remains the same. Remember to keep a 2-metre distance from others, wash our hands regularly and wear a face covering where required. Mobile testing facilities remain fully available in Bridgend County Borough for anyone who is experiencing symptoms of coronavirus, and further details of these can be found at the Council, Health Board and Welsh Government websites. Know that members have been inquiring about the vaccination rollout across the County Borough, so I hope these figures have proved you provided you with a greater insight into the progress of the programme. I will try and provide additional information later on in answer to the questions. And we will, of course, bring you as much detail as we can as the programme continues to be rolled out across the county borough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leader. Okay, then we move on to item 7. You've had your rest, Jill. So report of the Interim Chief Officer Finance, Performance and Change, the Council Tax Reduction Scheme.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the purposes, did you want me to hold on while people leave the meeting, Mr. Mayor?
Oh, yes, thank you. Yes, just been reminded. Give them a minute.
Okay. I'll make a start, Mr. Mayor. The first part is background. Yeah.
Yes, it wouldn't take them long to switch things off, really, would it?
No.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you. Okay. For the purposes of the recording, Jill Lewis, Interim Chief Officer, Finance, Performance and Change. The purpose of the report today is on the Council Tax Reduction Scheme for 2021-22. And the purpose is to provide a report to Council with information regarding the implementation of the 21-22 Council Tax Reduction Scheme and to set out the requirement for councils to adopt a CTR scheme by the 31st of January 2021 with the funding implications. It's a report that you receive at this time each year. And just to remind Council that the Council Tax Reduction assists those on low incomes who are liable for council tax. It's Council needs to adopt a scheme by the 31st of January in each year. If Council fails to adopt a scheme, then there would still be a scheme. It would be the Welsh Government National Scheme by default. So it is a national scheme, very similar to last year. The only local discretion is around the elements stated in the report. And any discretionary elements, I remind Council, must be locally funded. The current scheme ends on the 31st of March and therefore Council are being asked today to set up a new scheme for 21-22. Just by way of a few figures, we currently have 13,216 households receiving council tax reduction. About 8,500 of those are working age and about 4,500 are pensionable age. And 70% of those, over 10,000, are entitled to a full 100% reduction. Just one small change for 2021 in the regulations, 2 slight amends. The first is compensation under the Windrush scheme will be disregarded for the purposes of council tax reduction calculations, and as a change to universal credit at pension credit qualifying age. So those are just 2 small changes for 2021. As I said, there's limited discretion within the scheme. The 3 areas for discretion are set out in 4.6. And you can see the 3 bullet points there. So the ability to increase the standard extended reduction period of 4 weeks, the discretion to increase the amount of war disablement pensions and war widows pensions, and the ability to backdate the application of CTR. And at 4.11, you will see that there's a proposal that those discretionary elements remain in the same way as for previous years. So extended payment maintained at 4 weeks. The war disablement pensions discretionary elements would cost the council 9,100 for the financial year, and backdated to be maintained at a minimum standard of 3 months. So the total cost for the council for those 3 proposals is 9,100 for 21-22. Those are the discretionary elements. I just wanted to refer you to the costs set out in section 8, and just to remind council that this is a limited fixed budget. You'll recall that I've brought this to council's attention in previous years, that it was limited when the Welsh Government put the scheme in, and it is something that we have to fund the difference. So the actual difference between the cash limited scheme and the amount that it actually costs Bridgend is now up to 2.7 million, which is significant. We have put additional funding over the medium-term financial strategy years from 2014-15 to 2017-18, but obviously there is intense pressure with more people coming on to universal credit, and as a consequence there will be increased pressure on this budget. Now the increases, the recent increases as a result of COVID, we have had funded back from the Welsh Government round about 200,000, and we've got a new claim in for further funding, but the 2.7 million is for the council to find. So I just wanted to raise that at council just to remind you there's nothing new in that. It's been a cash limited budget, but the gap is increasing. So I take you to the recommendations at 9.1. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Jill. Can I have a mover, please?
Move.
Seconded.
I'll second the report, please, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have one speaker, and that's Councillor Howell Williams, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in moving the report, I'd like to thank the officers for bringing this forward. It offers very valuable support to the most vulnerable people, or some of the most vulnerable people in the county borough. No, it supports over 13,000 council taxpayers to enable them to meet that commitment of paying their council tax. And I think I'm going to try and preempt a possible question because of the discussion we had earlier today in the scrutiny. We do make regular representations to Welsh Government to fully fund this. I'm sure they find it quite annoying, but nonetheless, every opportunity we get, we do say that, you know, this should be fully funded. So just want to put that on the record. So yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Okay, it has been moved and seconded. All in favour? Yeah, no dissensions. Okay, thank you. I've been advised that we need a short break now for those members to be called back in and to log on. So we will have, I think, possibly a 3-minute break. Thank you. Okay, one more minute, I think, according to my clock. Okay, Andrew, do you think everybody's back?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, looks like everybody is back in the meeting.
Okay, thank you. I do have a hands up from Councillor Keith Edwards. Councillor Edwards, did you wish to say something? No, it appears not. Okay, we're moving on to item 8 then, report of the monitoring officer appointments to the Standards Committee. Kelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report today is to update Council on the process that was undertaken to appoint to a vacant position on the Standards Committee. Council may be aware that a vacancy had arisen on the committee for a town and community councillor following the resignation of a current councillor. The council has previously delegated authority to myself to oversee a recruitment process and to report back to Council on any successful appointment. At paragraph 4.2 of your report, you have the process that was adopted by the Standards Committee, and then following formal interviews which took place on the 21st of December, the Standards Committee approved the appointment of Councillor Gavin Thomas as a Town and Community Councillor representative on the Standards Committee for Bridgend. I therefore take you to the recommendations at paragraph 9 and ask you to note the appointment of Councillor Gavin Thomas on the Standards Committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Move, Chair.
Move.
Second.
Thank
Second.
you. Thank you. Okay, move on to item number 9 then, please. Report of the Chief Executive on the Local Government and Election Wales Bill. Mark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide Council with an update regarding the Local Government and Elections Bill and an action plan to ensure that the Council is prepared for the various elements of the bill that will come into force in due course. The bill, as I understand it, was actually was passed by the Senate on the 18th of November 2020, but received royal assent earlier today. It is a substantial piece of legislation covering electoral reform, public participation, governance and performance and regional working. So it's wide-ranging and multivarious. The approach I set out in the bill is essentially designed to ensure that local government in particular is more streamlined, that there's good governance and improvement intention, and fundamentally to try and drive better outcomes for residents and communities. In summary, the bill covers, as I say, a wide number of issues, but in summary, the bill introduces some reforms to the electoral arrangements for local government, including extending the voting franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds and foreign citizens legally resident in Wales, enabling councils to choose between first past the post or the single transferable voting systems, and changing the electoral cycle for principal councils from 4 to 5 years. In terms of the general power of competence, it introduces a widespread support. There was widespread support for a general power of competence. This has now been introduced in the new bill. Reforming public participation in local government, again, measures to try and encourage local people to participate in local government, including duty to broadcast certain council meetings and flexibility around remote attendance of members, which of course, based on the pandemic, is a direction we're already going in and we're already experiencing. Some reforms around democratic governance and leadership. So again, just picking a few out. The appointment of chief executives with listed and limited specific duties. The appointment of assistants to cabinets if suitable. Updating family absence provisions in line with those available to employees. And requiring leaders of political groups to promote and maintain high standards of conduct by members of their group. There's then a section on reform of the performance and governance regime. Again, you'll note that at least in some cases we've already moved along this route. So, for example, reforms to audit committees and the renaming as the Governance and Audit Committee. In terms of collaborative working, there was a full report to Cabinet yesterday with regard to corporate joint committees, or CJCs, covering functions, and in particular, in the first instance, the 4 functions of economic development, transport, strategic planning and school improvement, where there is already significant regional working. As I said, there was a full report on that matter approved and endorsed by Cabinet yesterday. The voluntary merger of principals council, so compulsory mergers are no longer government policy, but I suppose reading between the lines, embracing things like collaborative working becomes important in terms of the direction which Welsh Government would like us to follow. So, as I say, royal assent was approved in the Senedd today. I think, just to be clear, I think further regulations and guidance will probably come with each element of the Act as we move forward, and therefore the action plan that is in Appendix 1 is very much an initial action plan to try and demonstrate how we will approach and address each of these issues. But I think it's important to note that, of course, that will also evolve and potentially change as further guidance comes out. In terms of financial implications, I think it's just worth noting here that we do believe that some of these elements will create an additional burden on the council, certainly in terms of setup, and there is potentially some funding available from Welsh Government to support that. So with that, Mr Mayor, I'll take you to the recommendations in item 9, but of course both myself and colleagues present are more than happy to try and answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chief Exec. Can I have a mover of the report, please?
Move.
And a seconder?
Second.
Thank you very much. I have three asking for questions. And please, can you show your hand, not use the chat box, councillors? Please show your hand. Councillor Rod Shaw, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I broadly support this piece of legislation, but I do query the appendix which shows the actions of the local authority. In response to section 43, the council has written that it is compliant that all members publish their official addresses, and there is the option to use the civic office there. But I can count 10 councillors who have neither. So I think the compliant probably needs to be revised. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Next on the list is Councillor Ross Thomas.
Yeah, many thanks, Chair. Yeah, concur with Councillor Shaw's statement in terms of being broadly supportive of this. This is a tidying up exercise, I think, of local government in Wales, and those of us with long memories will remember that this sort of piece of legislation goes back to the early 2000s when Brian Gibbons was actually local government minister. This has been a long time in the making. I wonder if the Chief Executive has made an assessment, a top-line assessment of the financial implications. Obviously, I can see that in the report. We're obviously well on our way in terms of our digital workings, no thanks to the current pandemic. But whether an assessment has been made internally of what some of the biggest costs might be going forward, and whether that will impact significantly on our budget moving forward as well. Obviously, this morning we've been discussing budget pressures and the council's medium-term financial strategy, whether this needs to feed into that more widely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mark, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, if I may, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Penhill-Thomas. I think it's fair to say that there isn't a detailed assessment at this stage, because I think, as I indicated, there will no doubt be further guidance and further regulation which might explain in more detail specifically what we have to do. I think what I would offer, though, to perhaps again reassure you, is that I think my view is that these matters need to be, where possible, fully funded. So, for example, we already know there's some additional funding for some of the electoral reforms. We already know there's some additional funding for some of the digital reforms. I suppose what we just need to be careful of is in the margins that there aren't some increased burdens that are not funded. But broadly, I too am supportive of the bill, as I think both members have said so far. But the case we're making collectively, I think, as chief executives is, well, OK, let's also ensure they're properly funded, bearing in mind the other pressures that we're currently under.
Thank you, Mark. Can I ask Councillor Rodshaw to cancel his hand, please? And I'll call in Councillor Tim Thomas, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too am broadly supportive of the bill as well. I welcome the action plan stating the necessity of raising awareness to 16 and 17-year-olds and foreign nationals. I'm just wondering, as part of this campaign plan, can I just have some reassurances that we as members will have an opportunity to scrutinise and assess the effectiveness of these campaigns? And I just also want clarification on, I may have missed a detail here, but how we will come to a decision on whether to use the first past the post or the STV method. How will that actually come about?
If I may, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, carry on, Mark.
Certainly, if I answer the first one, it's probably likely that Kelly or Laura might be better placed to answer the second one. In terms of the first matter, in terms of the measures, for example, to increase participation by 16 and 17-year-olds, there's already a detailed plan that has been produced and is led by Gary Ennis, who, of course, leads on a lot of our election stuff. Of course, what you'll understand is that the pandemic has rather thrown out the window a lot of the original plans, and that's become much more difficult. But in terms of your role in wanting to scrutinise that, if that is a matter that, of course, you as a scrutiny committee choose to pick up, then I'm sure that's something we can share with you. Or similarly, outside of scrutiny, I'm more than happy to share those plans and receive feedback. They're certainly not secret, but the intention is obviously to work closely with the likes of schools and colleges, assuming people are in schools and colleges, to access those individuals, but also to write individually to those people across the county. In terms of the latter one, I will defer to Kelly or Laura, but I suspect that there would need to be a full council decision. But perhaps Kelly or Laura might want to pick up the issue of how we determine the either the first past the post principle or an alternative.
Kelly, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Indeed, there will have to be a council decision. We are still waiting, as a lot of this as it is now Act, for further guidance and for further regulations. So once we've got those further regulations to know the process, we will obviously prepare a report then that will come to council, and I assume it will be a council decision.
Thank you for that. Okay, next on the list is Councillor Pam Davis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As with all these things, with waiting for added bits, it gets dearer and dearer. I'm just wondering, have we got any indication at all how much finance we're likely to have off the WAG? As we know ourselves, unfortunately, we got a prison in our borough, and we were given the, well, we weren't given the option, we just had to find the money to be able to supply care, etc., into those prisoners, because apparently they sleep in our area. That's what was said. And also we saw the same thing with social media and IT, and it's all very well having everything webcasted, but I think we had 40-odd thousand the first year, and after that we just had to get on with it. So I do worry that more and more is being heaped onto us without the actual adequate funding. Just wondering if you had any idea at all how much it was likely to be, or is it at the moment it's just pie in the sky? Thank you.
If I may come back on that, Mark. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Davis. And I don't disagree with your sentiments. I can't really add much to my previous answer. I mean, we are aware that there will be some elements of additional cost. We are pushing for those to be fully funded. I think at the moment we know there's a certain amount of money available for the digital items and for the CJC items, and additionally we know there's separate money available for some of the electoral items. I think that, you know, just to reiterate the point really, I think as it becomes clearer specifically what is required in some of these issues, we would be making the case, as I know other authorities would, for that to be fully funded so it doesn't become a burden. And I think that's an important principle.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, next I have is Councillor James Radcliffe, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask a question regarding the general power of competence. And the reason for that is because at stage 2 of that bill, there were a number of amendments tabled concerning whether it would be okay for local authorities to use that general power to resolve issues like unadopted roads or issues where the ownership of the land in question couldn't be established but was still causing a health and safety issue, and the council was unsure what legal powers it had to deal with it. And the minister at the time replied that she didn't want to actually set guidance on how that general power was used in case it was used to limit the powers, and that in fact she wanted local authorities to be more creative with how they use that power. So can I ask whether the officers and the legal officer will get together and figure out how creative they are allowed to be, particularly concerning resolving many of the referrals that are often quite difficult to resolve at the moment, such as unadopted roads and so forth?
Yes, Kelly, would you like to come in on that one?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Radcliffe. As you're aware, that there have been many amendments during the course of this bill. I think we're up to the hundreds of amendments altogether. When we, as I said, and again, we are waiting for regulation and guidance. When we get that, we will obviously sit down to see how far this power extends. I think it's been quite clear that it isn't the panacea that you know, perhaps originally people hoped it would be. And certainly in England, it hasn't been used as initially thought. But we will be sitting down, we will see what powers this does give us and where we can use it, where we've previously been lacking powers. But I think it will also be key to look at perhaps established case law to see where other local authorities in England have used it and where it's been deemed acceptable and where it's been deemed unacceptable. But you know, there is work going on in the background. And once we get those regulations and guidance, we'll be in a stronger position to update you on what we can do going forward.
Thank you, Kelly. Next question I have from Councillor Penhow-Thomas, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for your indulgence the second time, Mr. Mayor. I just quickly wanted to welcome the proposal for a petitions committee. The Chief Exec and senior officers will be aware that this is something that's been raised at group leaders in the last couple of months. So I'm really pleased to see that part of this bill and the action plan going forward. This is absolutely no criticism of the office holders of the role of mayor, more a constitutional issue really, but the public perception, I think it's fair to say, is that when a petition is presented to Bridgend County Borough Council, it goes behind closed doors and isn't debated or doesn't see the light of day again. And that's simply because of the Constitution hasn't allowed it to be debated in any way, shape or form. So I'm really pleased to see that. I'm just seeking an assurance from the Chief Executive that the Democratic Services Committee will be the primary go-to body to help officers shape the way and the purpose of the Petitions Committee. I think that would be a really good suggestion going forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Kelly, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just going to say that we have got Laura Griffiths with us today, and she's already working on a scheme to do with the petition. So maybe Laura can give you an update on where we're at with that.
Yes, Laura.
Thank you, Mayor. For the purposes of the recording, my name is Laura Griffiths and I'm the Group Manager of Legal and Democratic Services. Kelly is correct. We are in the process of, it's not actually a petition committee, it is going to be a petition scheme that we have to introduce as part of the Act. And that's something that we will then be adopting into our constitution. And it will allow members of the public to have the opportunity to make a petition by paper, or we can have an electronic petition scheme. So that will be welcomed, giving members of the public the ability to do that. And then we do have to, there are conditions under the Act we have to stipulate in our constitution when we will accept a petition, how many, for example, how many signatures, and when we won't accept a petition. But that will all be set out in our constitution moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. I have no other questions. So I've had it moved and seconded. All in favour? To note, rather.
Aye. Aye.
Yes, seconded. Thank you, everybody. We're now moving on to item 10, questions to council. You will have seen that I, as Mayor, have accepted an urgent question from Councillor Alex Williams, and the leader has indicated his consent to accept the question. So this now takes precedent over the 3 written questions that we have. The same regulations apply regarding supplementary questions and the overall time taken for the question time. I would appreciate it if people did not indicate, or members did not indicate, that they wish to have a supplementary question until the supplementary question asked by Councillor Williams has been answered. I will then ask members for their hands for them who wish to ask a supplementary question, and I will only take the first 2. So, Councillor Williams, are you ready to put your question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just about. Can you hear me?
You had me worried for a minute. Okay, I think all members will be aware of the question. If that is the case, is the leader ready to respond and give an answer?
Yes, I am. I'll try and answer the question, and thank you for the question, Councillor Williams. I know it's a topic that will be of interest to every single member. It is understandably the #1 priority for every one in the UK and across the world at the moment, is how quickly can we ensure that people are vaccinated as quickly as possible. If I give you an update on where we are that builds on some of the information I provided earlier. As of the 17th of January, 17 care homes vaccination visits had been undertaken. The Health Board are committed to ensuring that each care home within the region is visited by the end of January. 2 community vaccination centres have been operational since the 4th of January, with the 3rd opening on the 18th of January and the 4th on the 25th of January. One of the first 2 community vaccination centres was Ravenscourt. From the 18th of January, community vaccination centres are running 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and that's 7 days a week. By the end of this week, all GP practices across the region and across Bridgend County Borough will have administered the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And pilots are planned for this weekend in each of the local authority areas for GPs to administer the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. I'll come on to that a little later. So far, over 1,000 offers to volunteer have been received and are being processed by the Health Board. Currently, the Pfizer vaccine is being used for residents and staff in care homes, and they are being vaccinated by a mobile vaccination team. Frontline health and social care workers are also being vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine, and they are receiving their doses at Princess of Wales Hospital and Ravenscourt. And the plan is also that the over 70s and the clinically extremely vulnerable will also receive the Pfizer vaccine. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine will be administered and has been administered to the over 80s, the over 75s, and all housebound residents from group 2, 3 and 4. And they will be delivered by primary care teams and GPs. Some of the key variables and risks for the health board, and indeed risks for every health board across the UK, is around supply, ongoing supply. There has been a requirement that there is a greater use of the Pfizer vaccine, and there are specific requirements, safe storage requirements about the Pfizer vaccine. That means that it is not as easy to administer in GP settings. There will be a need to revisit some care homes where there have been and are COVID cases. Training of vaccinators is underway. That's important, as well as the doses. There needs to be a significant scale up of the number of vaccinators, and that is happening as we speak. In terms of the local care homes, we have seen 4 care homes visited in the first 2 weeks. That is increasing rapidly this week, with 9 care homes being visited. The larger care homes were vaccinated as part of the first phase, and then next week will be the final 7 care homes. As I said earlier, myself and the Chief Executive meet the Chief Executive and Chair of the Health Board and colleagues from RCT and Merthyr on a weekly basis. This is at the top of our priority. We've made it clear to the Health Board that whatever they need from us, we will provide it to them, whether that's buildings, facilities, staff, management, admin, our call centre, whatever they need, volunteers to carry out the vaccines, redeploying staff, we will provide that to the Health Board. But we have seen this week a significant ramp up in the number of doses, the number of shots in arms, protecting the residents of Bridgend County Borough. And we will continue to work with and support the Health Board in the progress that they are making. And I'm happy to try and answer any supplementary questions that Councillor Williams or colleagues have. Councillor Williams's question was a comprehensive one, so I may not have answered the question he was asking, but I'm happy to come back if that was not the case. And finally, I would add that obviously we have explained to the Health Board, because I've had lots of queries from members, and I'm sure members have from constituents, that it is important that we get as much information as we possibly can out to residents of the county borough about the deployment, about the programme, and the likelihood of when they will receive their doses, and what will be happening in their local communities and with their local GP practices, etc. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Williams, there's 22 minutes left on the clock. So if you have a supplementary, I've got it ticking here on my phone.
I'll try not to use 22 minutes, Mr. Mayor. But,
yes, if you have a supplementary, give it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to thank the Leader for his very detailed reply. The objective of the original question was so that we as community leaders can attempt to allay the anxiety of residents about perceived delays to the vaccination programme following the First Minister's comments on Monday. In the Leader's response, I think he's gone some way to demonstrating that this issue is the very top of BCBC's agenda, and that he and his colleagues and the Chief Executive are putting pressure on the Health Board and the Welsh Government to make every effort to roll out the vaccine as quickly as possible so that it minimises the impact on the delivery of the local authority services on which we all rely. However, on Monday, Mr. Mayor, I had a rather sobering conversation with a GP who practices in this county borough. Two of the most alarming points of the discussion were that his practice has received just a third of the number of vaccines which they were promised on Friday, which means that he has had to totally redesign his clinic and can now no longer vaccinate the whole cohort of those 80 plus who are registered at his surgery. He says that if he had enough Pfizer vaccine, he could vaccinate all of his patients, regardless of age, within a weekend. As a result, they are now asking people to contact the surgery on a first-come, first-served basis to make an appointment, rather than being sent an appointment based on clinical need, which seems to be against the Welsh Government advice. He also believes that the lack of supply of vaccines is directly responsible for preventable deaths occurring at residential care homes in the county borough. Apparently, one such care home managed to ensure that their home was COVID-free up until mid-December. However, due to the slow rollout of the vaccine, 1/4 of all residents at the care home are now sadly no longer with us. So as a supplementary to my original question, Mr. Mayor, is the Leader able to redouble efforts to ensure that our care homes are given absolute priority in the rollout of the vaccine to prevent unnecessary deaths? And is he able to obtain an assessment of the so-called preventable deaths in care homes caused by COVID-19, which could have potentially been avoided if we had begun vaccinating residents earlier? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for that additional question from Councillor Williams. The Chief Executive can confirm that since December and since we've started to talk to the Health Board about this vaccination programme, I have made it very clear that the #1 priority for this local authority, the #1 priority for the Health Board has to be immunisation of our care home residents, and that comes above and beyond and is more important than any other group because of the inherent fragility and risk that there are to our care home residents. And we did see that programme accelerated beyond the milestone that was set by Welsh Government. I have also personally written and raised this with the Health Minister and said that this has to be our #1 priority. The vaccination programme is our #1 priority, and the #1 priority for the vaccination programme has to be protecting our care home residents. There is and will be an issue around some of the care homes that are categorised as red with our ongoing outbreaks, but again, we've asked for clarification on that and whether is there anything we can do even whilst there are outbreaks at care homes. So I hope that's provided some reassurance, and perhaps, Mr. Mayor, I could ask the Corporate Director for Social Services and Wellbeing to provide some additional information. But we are monitoring this on a daily basis through our Director of Social Services, with the Cabinet Member for Social Services and Early Help, to ensure that the milestones that we are given are met. They have to be met. We have to protect our care home residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Brian Jones, would you cancel your hand, please? And I'm going to bring in Claire Marchant to respond, and then I will ask members who wish to ask a supplementary. We have 17 minutes left on the clock. So Claire Marchant, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and be as brief as possibly I can with a very sobering subject, really, about how we protect the most vulnerable citizens in all of our population from the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've seen since the start of the pandemic that the impact that the pandemic has and that the virus has on care home residents if the vaccine gets into care homes. And for that reason, as the leader has said, the UK regulatory authority, the JVCI, prioritised above all other parts of the population and all other vulnerable people vaccination of care home residents. We, as the leader has said, have been working very hard with the Health Board to support them to deliver that vaccination programme across our care homes in the county borough. There were some challenges that they anticipated before Christmas, which led them to pilot use of the Pfizer vaccine in care homes, and they piloted in 3 care homes in Rotherham and Taff, which gave them the assurance about the safety of that vaccine to be deployed in care homes. And then from the start of this year, they've really been ramping up through the district nursing-led service the vaccinations within care home settings. In terms of care homes which have got COVID-19 present in them, the Health Board have to work to a risk assessment, which is a Welsh Government risk assessment, but which actually developed from good practice in CTM to determine whether it's safe to go into that care home to deliver the vaccine. So they have been going into care homes which are COVID positive, but a very small number they haven't been able to, or they haven't been able to vaccinate all residents in those homes. So they've got a catch-up programme at the end of the initial programme to make sure that all residents and staff within care homes are vaccinated. So it's an area which I think through safeguarding and public protection arrangements, day in, day out, we are working to support and protect care homes as best we can for the reasons set out in Councillor Williams' question, really, because we understand very clearly in real time the impact on our most vulnerable citizens if they do contract the virus.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, members, it's fastest fingers first, please. And I have 2. First of all, Councillor Malcolm James, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Leader, I'm looking at the vaccination centres that have been set out by Welsh Government. I can see Bridgend as only 1, yet from Llantrisant up to Merthyr Tydfil, there are 5. That means Llantrisant, Pontypridd, Abercynon, Aberfan and Merthyr Tydfil. Yet we in Bridgend have 1. Thank you.
Is comment, Leader? Or
yes,
Mark?
I would need to check on that. That's not my understanding of the current number of mass immunisation centres. Currently we have 2, and there is plans to expand that to 4, so not 5. And that largely reflects the population. We will check on that, but clearly I think Councillor James is right to identify the need for a scale up, and that will happen of capacity to deliver the vaccine. The good news that I can share with colleagues is that this weekend a pilot will begin in the Maestig area with the 3 practices in the Maestig area of deploying the Pfizer vaccine. Why that's important is because of the storage conditions required for the Pfizer vaccine means that it is not as transportable and as usable as the Oxford vaccine by our GPs, but the Health Board are looking at a way of deploying that by GPs. That's good news because there is far more Pfizer vaccine available. Hopefully that pilot will be successful, and if it is successful, then they can look at using more of that and ensuring that there's more immunisation right across the county borough by our GP practices. But I will go back to the Health Board and ask for clarification about those mass centres. Thank you for the question, Councillor James. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Brian Jones, please.
Thank you, Mayor. In the water executive call, there are a number of people, a number of residents who are actually shielding, and I imagine this is a lot same around the borough. Are there any special measures being put in place for those who are shielding to be vaccinated at home, or will they have to go to vaccination centres?
So arrangements will be made in certain circumstances for people, depending on their circumstances and conditions, to be vaccinated at home. Obviously, that there's additional resources for that, significant additional resources for that. So the preference is where it's safe to do so for people to be to travel or be taken to the centres. But I will bring Claire in, please, Mr. Mayor, to confirm that, and we can get clarity from the Health Board anyway, because that's a good question, Councillor Jones. Claire, please.
Claire, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, if people are housebound, which some of that shielded population will be, arrangements are being put in place either for district nurses to administer the vaccine, or for GP practices to administer the vaccine through home visits. If people aren't housebound but still clinically vulnerable and shielding, then, as the leader has said, they would be invited, and as the leader said, it would be via invite either to their own GP practice or into one of the vaccination centres in due course.
Thank you, Claire. Right, that concludes. I'm sorry, Councillor Walters, but the two supplementaries have now been asked, and I have time to take the first written question, which is on the agenda, and that is from Councillor Foisey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be as quick as I can with this question, unlike the previous one. It's regarding the speed cameras, and my question to the Cabinet member is, as the majority of speed cameras are not working and many drivers know and disregard the deterrent, can you please provide a timetable of which cameras and when the cameras will be brought back into beneficial use to deter and enforce the speed limits they're meant to? And may I ask for priority to be given to the speed cameras right outside the police headquarters at the junction of Cowbridge Road and York Road to be first on the list? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr.
Which
Mayor.
one of the Cabinet? Yep,
Yeah,
thank you, Councillor Young.
Mr. Mayor. Yeah, a bit ironic, that, isn't it? There's first speed cameras at the outside police headquarters. I understand the question from Councillor Boise. He may be able to deduce from the written answer that he's received that there are ongoing negotiations, in actual fact, with GoSafe, to make sure that a number of these cameras can come back into beneficial use. There are reasons why they are not in beneficial use. Lots of it to do with the age of the cameras and the technology that they use, but we're working around that. So can I give an assurance that some of these cameras will be coming back into beneficial use? I am a little bit reluctant, to be honest with you, to issue any statement or any written thing as to which cameras are not working, because I do believe that there is still a deterrent value in just seeing a camera there. And I think the value of the cameras is not just, if you like, catching speed merchants, as it were. It's about people seeing that the cameras are there, and I would say, to be perfectly honest with you, not knowing that the cameras are working. So I would say to the people that are out there, you know, please don't take a chance and think that these cameras are not working because you don't know which ones are and which aren't. But I do take the point that they should be working, and we are making efforts to bring them back into beneficial use.
Thank you, Councillor Young. We have 7 minutes left on the clock. Is there anybody with a supplementary question for this matter? We've got time. Councillor John Spanswick, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, following off that, yeah, I think we all accept that cameras are a deterrent that can save lives, whether they're working or not. The fact that the camera there and you don't know whether it's going to get flashed is a deterrent. So the question I'd like to ask is does Councillor Voice think that maybe this is an irresponsible question to ask at this time, given the fact this information is now public, and members of the public are going to think, oh, should I take any note of that camera? Surely there are other ways this question could have been asked without making it public and without being so irresponsible, I would say, even to the point that potentially this irresponsible approach by Councillor Voicey could even cost lives of adult children who are now going to take less notice of speed cameras out there. So just as a question to Councillor Voicey, really, with hindsight, has he been irresponsible in this question?
Well, I think your question should be to the cabinet member, not to the person who puts the question. So I don't know whether Councillor Young can respond to that.
I understand the question from Councillor Spanswick as well. I would just like to say that every councillor in the County Borough Chamber has the right to table questions, and Councillor Boyce, he's taken advantage of that in order to ask this question. The question is in order, and it was deserving of an answer. But you're right, and that's really the reason why I am reluctant to provide information as to the location of the cameras that we feel are not working. I would prefer it if it was left in the domain, as it were, that we will continue to try and rectify the situation with the cameras, and I'm quite confident that a number of these will be brought back into service in the near future, if not all of them. Councillor Spanswick.
Thank you, Councillor Young. We're running out of time now. I would just like to say to the other two members who submitted written questions that they will roll over to the next council meeting. Thank you, everybody, on that. We now move to item 11, urgent items. I have no urgent items, so I think we now move to item 12, exclusion of the public. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council will note you have one item left on the agenda, which is an exempt item, so you need to determine whether you're going to go into closed session. You will recall that you dealt with this substantive item and you determined at that point that this warranted being done in exempt session. So I'd ask you to apply the same test and see if those reasons still apply and whether the public should be excluded for this item. Thank you.
I move, Chair.
Seconded.
Second.
Are we all in favour of exclusion of the public?
Right.
Thank you. We will have a short pause, not a break, but we'll have a pause for just to make sure public are switching off.